So I'm going to be explaining to you guys what a for loop is. So let's start off as what is a loop. So a loop is really something that continues going. It continues looping. So it goes on and on and on. And that's interesting because for a for loop, it'll go on and on until we have something that stops it. So we usually use a for loop when we know kind of how many times you want this loop to go on for. So a for loop is, we have a basic format for a for loop. And that's for, and then we do in parentheses, int I equals to whatever number, and then that I is something something, which is going to be our restriction on what stops our for loop. And then we have I plus plus. So now this is the most basic type of for loop, and I'll be explaining it a little bit more. So let's start with this for. So this for begins our for loop, and we have our arguments within it. So this first part is you're defining a. So you're defining a new variable, which we have termed as I. And I can be whatever you want to call it, but I is just easier for most people. And so whatever number you put here is whatever value it will be. So if you say I equals to 1, we start the for loop with I equals to 1. And now this data type right here can also change as well. But for the most basic one, let's just start with int, which is just creating I as an integer. So let's say the I begins as 1. Now this part of it, let's call b. And this is the restriction. And every time we want to start off each loop again and again with b. So we start each one with b, and then we go to c. So hypothetically, if this were to go on and on and on, it would go from a first, and then you go to b, and then you go to c. And b, you are evaluating the evaluation of if you want to continue or not. If it does not meet the evaluation requirements, you stop the for loop. But let's say that b does meet the evaluation, we go to c, which c usually we do plus plus, which means that we integrate I with 1. So it's just I plus 1 equals to the new I. And then we continue until this evaluation is met. So let's say C just integrates. Now we want to go back into the loop, and it loops again because our evaluation this part has not been met. That means we go back to B to evaluate, and then we go back to C, B, C until we go back to B, and this is met. So if the requirement is met, we break. And through all this, we are going through our body. So each time we go from B to the body, and then after we execute the body, we go back to C, and then C integrates one more time, and then we go back here. So really, it goes from B, you execute to the body, and then you go to C, and then you evaluate this entire thing. So the most important part of the for loop that we just drew is that each time you evaluate it, you are able to break out of the for loop as long as you are meeting the requirements of B. And once you meet out of B, you break out of it. So you break if met. And then you no longer execute your body anymore. So that's how you create a for loop.